Donald Trump is proposing to cut taxes by $10.5 trillion over the next decade. The left, of course, is blowing a gasket about deficits. In a recent article, Bloomberg panicked about the, quote, massive expense of Trump's tax cuts, noting they would exceed many government agency budgets. Bloomberg was particularly upset that Trump does not plan to cut Social Security and Medicare, since they would love him to faceplant. Thing is, tax cuts are not a cost at all. In fact, they're a return of stolen goods to the people, who will no doubt spend it better than the corrupt degenerates in Washington. They'll spend part of it on groceries or car repairs. They'll spend the rest investing to grow the economy, which incidentally reduces inflation. So when a mugger sleeps in, we don't call those foregone crimes a cost, and as Bloomberg does, complaining that a tax cut costs more than many government departments is like complaining that maxing out your 401k costs more than many hookers in Vegas. So why does the left pretend tax cuts are a cost? I mean, sure, they lie, but also because they're looking from the perspective of the government. Tax cuts are a cost to the government, after all, specifically because they are a gain to the people. They transfer resources from the government to the people. This is important in deficit debates where the left paints tax cuts as fiscally irresponsible. But to illustrate, imagine if federal spending shrank to $10,000. Congress meets once every 2 years to name post offices, but taxes went to literally zero. Well, the deficit would soar to 100%. $0 in, 10 grand out, 100% deficit. But of course, that would be very fiscally prudent. It would take us from squandering $6 trillion on pointless wars, bank bailouts, and crony welfare to squandering 10 grand naming post offices. And so my modest proposal is rephrase tax cut to income hike. So with that, how does Trump plan to hike Americans' income by $10.5 trillion? Well, about half of it is extending his 2017 tax cuts, which doubled the standard deduction, lowered individual tax rates across the board, and cut the corporate rate to something competitive. Now, the $3 trillion comes from boosting the child tax credit to $5 grand. So tax credit meaning if you owe $5,000 in taxes, you pay nothing. Multiply that by the number of kids. The remaining $3 trillion comes from ending taxes on tips, ending taxes on Social Security payments, and reducing the corporate rate further to 15%, which would make it low enough to actually lure European or even Chinese companies to the U.S. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. So far, we've only talked tax cuts. Then comes the fun part, spending cuts, the part that panics Bloomberg. So $10.5 trillion over a decade comes to $1 trillion per year in spending cuts. If you're looking to cut a fast trillion, some excellent options include cutting welfare to illegals, which is $450 billion a year, cutting welfare for Ukraine, which is $200 billion and counting, cutting welfare for corporations like the $1.2 trillion Build Back Better Act, renamed Inflation Reduction, or finally foreign aid, where we hand out $100 billion a year for everything from LGBT activists in Pakistan, not a joke, to military advisors who die so lobbyists can lock the U.S. into every conflict on Earth. And if Elon really does advise a Trump administration as he's floated, sink and all, savings could get into the trillions. Read the rest with charts and all the gory details at profsanonge.com. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.